Okay, thanks. I guess people wander in from their luncheons. We've got real plates. We've got pretty tasty vegetarian food, even more sustainable than sustainable seafood. And this luncheon panel is called The Changing Media and the Everlasting Sea. We talk about rapid changes in the ocean, but we're certainly seeing them in the media universe. And I've always said the last resource not fully exploited in the ocean is good stories about the state of the ocean. There are lots of good stories there, but they're not being told as often these days, and the lines are blurring on who tells them, and also for ocean advocates and scientists, where do you tell your story? Where do you go to tell your story? We've got a panel. Last time it was all traditional media folks up on the media panel. Now we're sort of have a good representation of the changing face of media. We're going to start with Tim Wheeler, who just as we gave Juliet Elprin our media award yesterday, in part because as a newspaper reporter she's an endangered species. So is Tim. He's been some 30 years with the Baltimore Sun, covering Chesapeake Bay, a lot of environmental and growth issues. He's also former president of the Society of Environmental Journalists. Jeff Burnside moderated the earlier ocean policy panel. He's an award-winning broadcast reporter from NBC Miami, who, again, unusually in today's environment, is allowed to do regular pieces on the environment, a lot of pieces on the ocean and changing issues within the changing, generally not for the better, oceanscape of the Florida Keys. Louie Psihoyos, you've already know. He was last year's media winner for Peter Benchley Ocean Awards for the Cove. We like to say that, the Peter Benchley Ocean Awards are the Academy Awards for those who act on behalf of the sea. And of course now he's got one of each. So after the Cove, we saw the rough cut of his next film on global extinctions. And anything you didn't like about it will be fixed in post. And we have Charlotte Vick, who's with the Sylvia Earle Foundation. Many of you know her from her training you up and giving access to Google Ocean, Google 5.0, the other 71% of Google Earth. And Dave Toole, who's a veteran, one of my heroes. He helped move the semiconductor industry from using sulfuric acid. He got them using lasers to etch their microchips, and a longtime surfer and alleged guitarist who's now with DigitalOcean. I'm going to just ask a few questions to get going, and then we'll open it up, because starting really with, I guess, Tim and Jeff, how's ocean coverage faring now? I mean, we've got friends who won Pulitzer Prizes covering the ocean and aren't covering the ocean anymore, some of them taking salary hits.
Well, okay, it works. I just want to say, first off, I'm glad to be here, and that's probably the best thing I can say. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad you are too. After yesterday evening's rapture, I was half afraid I'd get here and find all the faithful were gone, but evidently some of you are gone, but not all of you, so. I was here 2 years ago at your last summit. How many of you were here then? Raise your hand. Okay, I'll try not to repeat myself. You probably don't remember anything I said, but if you do, you'll remember I was whining at that time about not being able to go on a reporting tour to the Bering Sea that winter, that my publisher had decided it wasn't local enough. I should have kept my mouth shut, because the anvil came down after that, and we lost about a fourth of our staff. So I feel a little bit like the winner of the Survivor series this time around. If you'll remember, things in the media world have been, especially in the fossil media that I represent, newspapers have been taking a real hard beating. The good news, I guess, and that's what I'm here to report, is that it seems to have let up for the time being. The number of layoffs last year dropped to a fraction of what it had been before, from about 14,000 to less than 3,000. It's still happening. They're still trickling away. But things seem to have plateaued. We've even, hired a few people back out there. And, and so there's reason to hope for the time being that things are stabilized. And where things are stable on our end, that means we can start thinking about stories again instead of packing our boxes. In terms of oceans coverage, I think there's again, reason for optimism and hope out there. If you look at the journalism prizes, the Oaks, the Polk, even the Pulitzer, nothing like a good disaster to get people covering something. The Gulf spill coverage got a lot of good attention, if not won some awards and honorable mention in others. And this year's Grantham Prize winner in the book world, which was Seasick. So there are some reasons for hope.
Well, the TV news business is not far behind the newspaper business in terms of seeing its dinosauric future. The recession hit us pretty hard as well. At one point, I had an environmental news segment in our newscasts that we called Eco Watch, which I think at the time was the only regular environmental news segment on a local TV station, and it was wonderfully popular. They say critical acclaim, meaning it wasn't volume, but the quality of the reviews were good. And then, we had a regime change at the top of our station, and it went away. I think because there was the misperception that environmental stories aren't high on the list of interest of viewers. And I obviously take exception with that. I think it's the way those surveys are done, frankly. If you ask somebody how important are in relation to other topics are environmental stories, they tend to score lower than if you say, do you care about the amount of lead in the paint your kids are with, or what they're ingesting, or the level of pollutants in your seafood, or the erosion on your favorite beach. Then suddenly, or drought, or severe weather, and suddenly I think those issues rise much higher. So I really do think that it's the way those surveys are worded that skews that lower than what I think it deserves. I also think that TV, it's still, for all its shortcomings, and there are many, TV news is still where most Americans get their news, from TV news. And it's the only medium, I believe, where it doesn't preach to the choir. If you think about it, when you sit down in front of the newscast, you never know what story is going to be next. So you're served this menu, and you might not have any predisposed interest to an issue about the oceans, but suddenly there it is right in front of you. As opposed to a newspaper where you naturally search out headlines that are of interest and then start reading from there, or go to watch a documentary or pick up a book or a magazine article. Those are all choices you make based on your interest in that topic. And not TV news. It's the only medium like that. And of course we have the tools to take someone, transport them down onto a coral reef, to give them just a hint of the majesty that you can feel and sense when you're down there or anywhere in the natural environment, or take them to the Gulf and show them the tears on the faces, or certainly the flailing motion of a bird covered in oil. Those are powerful, powerful tools, and so I still have hope that that we can pull through this recession. And there's this tendency to blame news media ownership on this, and yeah, they do deserve some of the blame, but it is a business. They're not in it for the public good. Remember, we used to get permission to use the public airwaves, but now the vast majority of viewers see the same broadcast on cable when you don't need the same kind of government approval. And you're not able to mandate that kind of public affairs notion, which I think is a tremendous sea change that has gone almost unnoticed. If there was that leverage still, I think you'd see local broadcasters or national broadcasters taking a much different tact. So I blame part of the public. If you don't watch something, it won't go on TV. If you do watch something, there will be more of it. And sadly, the good people who are like you in this audience opt to not watch, leaving the voters who do watch to decide what kinds of programming gets put into a newscast. And I don't have an answer for that other than I hope you all write a very short, powerful letter to any time you see a great story about the environment on your local newscast. You'd be surprised the impact one simple, clear letter can make. Besides all the studies and all, just one simple, clear letter. So I have hope for the future.
They say one letter's worth 1,000 emails.
That's right. Absolutely true.
And Louie, I think, you know, somebody who worked for 10 years doing documentary television, I think I can speak for almost all the documentary filmmakers I know in saying that we really resent that The Cove was your first film.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a mammal, you know, jumping around from one niche to the next under the feet of dinosaurs. I started out in newspapers, went to magazines, and then you know, found film. And I've written books too, but I feel like this is you know, for me, it's the most powerful medium in the world. You know, a video, because you can, you know, you have 90 minutes, 90 minutes to sit with somebody and get them viscerally connected to that you know, using film, which, you know, which is a lot like still photography, but it's you know, 30 frames a second.
Well, let me ask you, it's this blurring that we're sort of seeing between news, education, and advocacy, and you had a lot of investigative elements in your piece. Of course, you also, it was very dramatic. Where do you see yourself fitting in that range?
You know, I started out as a journalist, but I don't feel like I have aspects of that right now. I don't think we have time to show both sides of the story right now. I mean, to me, it's so clear what I have to do is just advocate to, you know, for the oceans that don't have a voice. I don't have time to talk about, you know, to the naysayers and give them a 54. You know, in the Cove, we do have, you know, the Japanese voice. And we you know, but people think that we totally avoided them. You have Joji Morishita, you know, the head of the IWC, saying, "I've never seen a compelling reason to give them, you know, any kind of justification why they shouldn't be regarded as a fish." But we disregard that as a voice because it's so absurd, you know. So when you do show the other side, it tends to, you know, in a case that's so black and white, it tends to be like you don't hear them anyway, but they're there. I mean, but I feel like we need more films that are advocacy more than straight journalism. Seeing you know, both sides of the story to me is extremely dull. You know, unless you're taking a position. In fact, all newscasts, I think, take a position. If you decide to use CNBC as your news source, of CNN or Fox, you're getting a slant anyway. And
Especially with Fox.
Especially with Fox. But, you know, I mean, I will say, though, you know, I haven't had television in my house personally for 10 years. To me, there's too much, you know, no offense.
So,
I mean, I haven't seen
you're who Jeff's talking about.
But there's too much signal to noise ratio to me. There's just too much noise on television. I don't have time to watch advertising. I just, you know, my head, it wants to be full with information that's useful. I don't want to be sold something. And, you know, when you're selling, you know, let's be honest, when you're buying magazines, newspapers, and television, which is, you know, the news, you're selling something for the advertisers. I feel like with a documentary, I'm selling ideas. You know, there's a concept that, you know, in the movie business, you're selling, people say they're selling tickets too, they're butts and seats, but I don't look at it that. I look at an audience, I think those are all minds and seats. You know, I have this amount of time to change people's minds, and that's all I care about. And, you know, when I'm shooting for you know, when I was working even for National Geographic, you're selling the ads that are sandwiched between those stories, less than other magazines, but you're still selling something. And I feel like there's a sort of a puritanical thing when you can have 90 minutes uninterrupted to tell a story. That's it's really powerful.
Especially great pictures.
Yeah, so I went to a journalism class, and I asked the students how many read a newspaper, and they all raised their hands, and it took me a second. I said, and if your professor didn't require you to read a newspaper, how many, and read a newspaper, and the hands all dropped down. So everybody's online in this sort of unlimited range and universe. And then there's certain, like, you know, drivers like Google, you know, which has become a verb to Google things. Sylvia talked to the leadership and told them, you know, Google Earth was nice, they call it Google Dirt, and got them to do Google 5.0. Now 6.0. So now we have the heavens and the seas. And Charlotte, you know, at the last summit was helping train. We immediately signed up 50 people training up on Google Ocean. But briefly, who goes there, what do they see, and if I have a story, is it a news story? Is it a story that should go on Google Ocean?
We have a lot of different stories in there. The joy of what we're doing with it is that it's coming from the perspective of a lot of different people. So we went out to the scientific community first. That was the audience that we were trying to create an audience for the scientists so that they had a way of telling the stories of what they're trying to do in the ocean. So scientists were number one. Ocean enthusiasts of all types basically came in number two. That's the dive community, that's the filmmaking community that's interested in that. And we've now got about, in the Explore the Ocean layer, which is the one that I curate on behalf of Sylvia, who is really the curator, we have about 2,000 stories now. We've trained around 1,600 people. Our largest contributor is National Geographic, represented by both Sylvia and Enrique here. But Smithsonian is very close behind and is trying to catch up with them. But that's they each have about 200 stories in the Explore the Ocean layer. But really, so those two organizations represent 20% of what's in there. The rest of it is coming in from all over the world. This year, we're trying to move into Spanish for the first time. I'm hoping that in 2012, we'll be able to launch a Spanish language version that has a few stories from the English layer selected for primarily location, because it is really a tool also for marine spatial planning. It's a way that people can go and look at a location and find out what's going on in that location. We found out during the Gulf oil spill, the eyeballs were on the Gulf. I mean, immediately people went to the ocean in Google Earth and started looking to see what they could find, and they were rewarded with little stories that were there. The Heart Research Institute told me they were really glad they had a few stories in there, because when the press was calling and saying, what's down there, what's important, they said, well, just go look in Google Earth. So but we have links from this. I'm sure a lot of you have not actually looked at some of these stories that are in there, but there are a lot of links back. So there are links back to newspapers. There are links back to that are stories that have been done by newspapers, by TV stations. There's a TV station in Florida that has put in some material from some of their shows. So it's got representation from every conceivable direction so far, and I'm hoping we're going to see more and more of the same, because it really is kind of working. The original 250 videos that went in, I can keep the metrics on those still myself because it was in an account that I created. We've had, in a little more than a year, we had about 8 million views on those 250 videos, all of them educational pieces. The heavy usage by educators. I get email all the time from teachers, even in places like Bangladesh, saying thank you for what's in there. We've been using it to teach science classes here in Bangladesh all year. That sort of thing. And so it is a global reach, often right now just English-based, but I'm convinced that if we go into other languages, we're going to get a lot more. And I do think that if you are doing geospatial planning, you should put stories in. I'm hoping my friends over here from the Harbor School that I've visited are going to put some stories in as well. And Rudy, wherever he is, I want a story. There he is. I want a story from him about what he's been doing with other high schoolers, because it's not just for adults. We want a representation from a broad cross-section of everyone.